My name is Mark. I'm an actor, but you've probably never seen anything that I've been in. Even though I constantly went out for auditions, I really didn't have a lot of steady work. My wife Gretchen had a good job at a bank, and I worked part-time at a coffee shop to earn as much as I could when I wasn't chasing my dreams. I also helped out around the house a lot, mostly so that Gretchen wouldn't feel so resentful for being the breadwinner. One day, Gretchen suggested that I start taking on some side gigs to supplement our income. I didn't know how to do that, so she suggested that I go online to see if anyone nearby needed help. I was pretty good at construction and renovation stuff, so I went to Craigslist to see if there was anything that would fit me. Right away, I found a post from a guy named Jonathan. His address was really close to ours, and he needed help fixing the door on his dishwasher. I had the tools for it, and it seemed like an easy gig, so I emailed him. We sent a couple of messages back and forth, and I agreed to go over to his place that afternoon. When I got there, Jonathan seemed really nice. He took me inside and showed me his kitchen. His house was so much nicer than ours. I could tell he made a lot of money. Everything was expensive and clean, except for his dishwasher. It was an old model, and its door had fallen completely off. As I checked out the damage, he poured me a glass of lemonade. I asked him what had caused the damage, and he said, "Oh, it's just old, I guess." Then he handed me the lemonade. I could tell he was lying. There were scratches along the edge of the door, and the screws had been yanked out. Whoever had broken this dishwasher had done it on purpose. It looked like someone had whacked a wrench against the side of it until the whole door fell off. I instantly got suspicious. I looked down at the lemonade in my hand and knew that I shouldn't drink it. This guy was up to something, and I didn't trust anything that he gave me to drink. I pretended to take a long sip, but I kept my lips shut. Then I asked if he could get me a towel before I got started. While he grabbed one, I quietly poured the rest of the lemonade down the sink. When he came back with the towel, I pretended that I just finished drinking the whole thing. He smiled and told me to take my time. Then he left the room. Despite my fear, I wasn't 100% sure that Jonathan had tried to poison me. Maybe it was all in my head. So with him out of the room, I turned toward the dishwasher. I would finish the job and get out of there as soon as possible. It took me less than 10 minutes to get the door back on its frame. The dishwasher still had obvious scratches along its side, but otherwise it was fixed. I stood up to leave, but when I turned around, Jonathan was already standing right behind me. "Done already?" I nodded. "Are you okay?" he asked. "You look a little woozy." The way he said it told me everything I needed to know. He expected me to be woozy. He had tried to drug me. If I was going to leave safely, I needed to play along. "A little," I said, forcing myself to stumble a bit. "Maybe you should sit down for a bit while I get your money." He grabbed my shoulders and guided me toward the living room. I saw a long rope laying on the table. I hadn't noticed that before. Clearly, he was planning to tie me up. "Actually," I said, "just Venmo me. I need to get home." He tried to tell me to wait. He said I wasn't in a good state to drive. He still thought that his stuff was coursing through my system. I didn't stop, though. I hurried toward the door and flung it open. I could have raced out of there, but there was someone standing in my way. Gretchen. She was out on the porch, waiting to knock. Without saying anything, she walked inside, forcing me to step back. "What's going on?" I sputtered. She gently placed her hand on my chest, and then she violently shoved me backwards. I fell onto the couch. Then she turned toward Jonathan and asked if I drank everything. "Yup," Jonathan answered. "It's amazing he's still able to stand." They both turned toward me. "No offense, buddy," Jonathan told me, "but Gretchen needs a real man in her life. It'll all be over soon." I was too shocked to say anything. This was all their plan to get rid of me? Gretchen and her lover had created the Craigslist ad, convinced me to come here, and then what? What were they going to do? Gretchen pulled a knife out of her purse. She looked right at me, but her expression was cold. "I'm sorry, but I have to do this." She stepped closer, holding the knife in front of her. Jonathan grabbed my arm, ready to start tying me up. I kicked him as hard as I could. He stumbled backward, colliding with Gretchen. They both fell onto the table. As I ran out the door, I heard Jonathan scream in pain. Gretchen had accidentally stabbed him with the knife. I raced into my car and drove away. When I got to a busy street, I parked my car and called the police. I told them everything, and they said to come into the station to give a statement. They warned me not to go back to Jonathan's house. Within the hour, the police had visited his house and found evidence to corroborate my story. They tested the empty glass and found traces of sleeping medicine. They also found the ropes and the bloody knife. Unfortunately, they didn't find Jonathan or my wife. I'm still waiting for the police to call. It's been 3 weeks and I haven't heard anything. They're still on the run.
Matthew and I had been best friends for years. We started off as college buddies and kept in touch through the next several grueling years of graduating and entering the work industry. I thought I had known everything there was to know about him. He was a fairly regular guy, the kind that you probably wouldn't bother sparing a second glance when passing him on the street. Average height, average looks, average personality. But somehow, we got along pretty well and managed to stay friends over the years. We used to go out fairly regularly for drinks too, but after a while, he started blowing me off with more frequency. I thought that perhaps he lost interest in me as a friend or simply didn't feel like going, but whenever I called to invite him to the pub, he'd sound irritated, like I'd bothered him in the midst of something important. It didn't concern me at first, but after a while, it grew pretty tedious. If he didn't want to hang out with me anymore, I'd rather he just tell me that outright. I thought we were best friends after all, and there was no point keeping up a pretense if it wasn't real anymore. It was a Friday evening, and I just knocked off work, feeling like I needed to wash away my tiredness with a drink or two. Like always, I dialed Matthew's number while getting off the bus, intending to invite him out. Even if it was likely he'd refuse, I'd hated not offering him the choice, and maybe it would give me an opportunity to ask what was going on with him lately. He answered after the fourth ring, his voice low and gruff and slightly breathless.
Yeah?
Hey Matt, it's Jack. I'm just heading up to the pub on Brook Street. Want to join me? I heard movements on the other end of the phone, a faint thud like something falling.
Sorry, man. Not tonight.
He said. Okay, I said quietly, listening to the background noise on the other end of the line. I could hear wind whistling and something dripping. Where was he? Is everything okay?
Yeah, man. Why wouldn't it be?
He said sharply, almost aggressively, like I asked something I shouldn't have.
Look, I really gotta get going.
Beneath the sound of his words, I thought I heard something else. A faint cry, or perhaps a whimper followed by another thump. Yeah, okay. He hung up before I could finish speaking, the call going dead in my ear. What was all that about? And what were those sounds I'd heard? He definitely wasn't in his apartment, I could tell that much. He hadn't sounded like he was alone either, but I couldn't be sure. He didn't have a girlfriend or anything, but I suppose he could have hooked up with someone. It just all seemed rather odd, and something was itching the back of my mind, a feeling that something was wrong. The tone of his voice, the noises in the background, the urgency to get me off the phone. What did it all mean? I pulled up my phone and opened the Snapchat app. I barely used it these days, but I knew it had a map function that allowed you to view your friend's location. Maybe it was being a bit creepy, but I was worried about Matthew and wanted to make sure he wasn't in any kind of trouble. When the map finally loaded, it pinpointed Matt at a location a couple of blocks from his apartment. If I was thinking of the right location, it was an old industrial park that was nothing but a bunch of abandoned warehouses now. What was he doing out there? The industrial park was about a 20-minute walk from where I was, so I turned my back on the pub and started walking the other way. If Matt was in some kind of trouble, it was up to his best friend to help him, right? Still, it was weird he hadn't mentioned anything to me. I would have been none the wiser if not for his strange and aloof behavior these past few weeks. I walked quickly and reached the cluster of the warehouse just over 15 minutes later. When I checked the map again, Matt was still in the area, though it didn't give me any more specific details. He could have been anywhere inside the old industrial park. It was well past dusk now, and the sound of traffic had faded in the distance. I shivered as a wind picked up, whistling through the old abandoned buildings. I started walking around between the warehouses, trying to look for any sign of Matthew, but I couldn't see him. Maybe the map function was faulty and wasn't tracking his location properly. I was probably worrying about nothing anyway. A faint scream made me freeze, the hair on my neck standing on end. What was that? An animal or a person? I stood and listened in silence, holding my breath. Again, another muffled cry coming from inside one of the nearby buildings. Was someone in danger? The muffled scream sounded female, but it was hard to tell as it echoed, distorted around the warehouse. Pulling my phone out, I typed in 911 and paused before I hit dial. I wanted to make sure there was actually someone in trouble before I called the police. It might have simply been some kids messing around, but somehow, I doubted it. I entered their warehouse through the broken doorway, rotten pieces of cardboard barely hanging from the hinges. It was dark, but I didn't want to risk turning on my phone's light in case it gave away my presence. I squinted, peering through the gloom as I picked my way through the dusty building. Somewhere ahead of me, I could hear the sound of whimpering, like someone scared or in pain. "Shut the hell up before I silence you for good," a voice snarled through the dark, making me shudder. "Nobody's coming to help, so you might as well keep quiet." The cries fell silent, and I picked out two silhouettes in the dark ahead of me. One lying prone on the ground, another standing over them. The second figure crouched down, and as my eyes adjusted, I glimpsed a knife glistening with blood. I let out a soft, involuntary gasp, my fingers trembling as I gripped my phone. The silver of breath echoed through the silence, and the figure in front of me suddenly turned around. My heart plummeted down into my stomach, the ground rocking beneath my feet. Matthew stood in front of me, clutching the bloody knife. I recognized his blonde hair and sharp jaw, but his eyes, dark full of bloodlust, belonged to a stranger. He was almost unrecognizable like this. Blood smeared his cheek, a strange smile tugging at his lips. When his gaze fell on me, the smile disappeared. Surprise crossed his features. "Jack?" He half gasped, half whimpered. What are you doing here?" I swallowed, my throat feeling bone dry. The words wouldn't come out, my tongue curling around silence. The surprise disappeared, replaced with a hard, cold certainty. "You shouldn't be here." "What are you doing? What is this?" I finally blurted, my gaze flickering behind him to the young woman on the ground, her hands bound with rope, blood dripping down her face and neck. A nasty cut was gouged into her cheek. "You shouldn't be here," Matthew repeated, his voice getting more panicked. "What the hell are you doing here?" "I was worried about you," I managed to gasp out, taking a trembling step backwards. "You've been acting strange, and I was worried." Matthew shook his head, the knife tightening in his hand. "You should have stayed away." I took another step back, and he followed, shuffling forward. In the darkness, with the blood on his face and that mad gleam in his eye, he looked like a stranger, a murderous stranger, no longer my best friend. "Matt, you really shouldn't have come." I recognized the warning in his voice, and the second he made his move, lunging towards me with the knife. I turned and ran, tripping over debris in the darkness of the warehouse and stumbling out into the night. I'd already hit dial on the phone and spoken sharp, gasping pants as the call connected. "Please, you have to help me, he has a knife," I blurted, sweat dripping in my face as I fled. "There's a girl, she's been hurt,
Where are you? Can you give me an address?"
I told her the name of the area based off the map I'd used to track Matthew. begging her to hurry. I could hear Matthew running behind me. He stopped chasing me as soon as I hit the main road. Cars trundled back and forth, the pavement busy with pedestrians hitting the pub on a Friday night. There's no way he would risk attacking me here in such a crowded place. Before long, the police finally showed up, and I showed them to the warehouse where Matt had been. The girl was still there, alive but bleeding. But Matthew, the man I had once called my best friend, was nowhere to be seen. The girl, whose name I learned was Emily, was the daughter of a wealthy businessman who had been embezzling millions from the company Matthew worked for. When the discrepancies were discovered, Matthew, a low-level accountant, was framed as the scapegoat. Fueled by a desperate need to clear his name and protect his future, he took Emily hostage, hoping to use her as leverage to make her father confess. The night I stumbled upon the scene, Matthew was on the verge of breaking Emily and doing unspeakable things, his initial resolve hardening into something monstrous. My unexpected arrival threw a wrench into his plan, forcing him to flee, leaving Emily bound and injured, but alive. The police investigation that followed was a media frenzy. I was hailed as a hero for rescuing Emily, but the guilt of what I had witnessed and the chilling realization of the monster Matthew had become gnawed at me relentlessly. Emily eventually recovered from her physical injuries, but the trauma of her ordeal left her deeply scarred. As for me, I was left grappling with the shattered remains of my friendship, forever haunted by the memory of the bloodthirsty stranger Matthew had become, a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of even the most ordinary people.
I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw the apartment listing. It was a 1-bed, 1-bath, a spacious updated kitchen, and an in-unit washer and dryer, all for $1,000 a month. Usually apartments like that go for at least $1,300, and that's if it's dingy. When I toured it, it wasn't the cleanest, and certain spots had a putrid smell. The leasing agent promised that it would be clean before I moved in. They said that I might need to do some cleaning myself, but that they would deal with the smell. The agent seemed eager to get someone to move in as soon as possible. It was everything I wanted and, well, under my budget. So I signed the lease and moved in as soon as the leasing agent would let me. On move-in day, the apartment was still pretty dirty. I knew I would have an oasis once I cleaned up that layer of grime, but after a string of poor living situations and bad roommates, I wanted to create a space where I could unwind and relax. Once all my boxes were moved in, I got to cleaning. I started in the kitchen and then moved to the bathroom. When I was cleaning the floor in the bathroom, I discovered one of the rectangle tiles was loose. It wiggled in its mold. I went and got a fork and I was able to flip it up. To my surprise, there was something nuzzled into the hole. I pulled out a leather-bound notebook with a skull drawn on the cover with what looked like a ballpoint pen. Before I opened the notebook, it felt heavy in my hands. Something about it creeped me out. Like, why go through so much trouble to hide a notebook? As I started to inspect it, I understood why. The book was filled with entries that dated back decades. Each entry was a description of a person. It included their age, approximate height and weight, physical appearance, disposition, routines, and some miscellaneous information. Most entries had a lock of hair taped onto the page. Others had a small necklace or a bracelet. It seemed like a trophy notebook of a serial killer, and I wasn't even being dramatic. I read one entry where the man described how he killed the person. It was too disturbing to repeat, but I'll say it involved skinning the person while they were still alive. I immediately went to the police station to turn it in. Whoever made that journal could still possibly be out there. The police appreciated that I brought it straight to them. I told them where I found it and gave them the number of the leasing agent. The killer must have lived in that apartment at one point or another. The police told me that they would update me if they found anything out. On my way home, I wondered about it. If the killer lived in my apartment at some point, why he would leave his precious murder notebook. Did he live there 5 years ago or a month ago? You would think that the notebook itself would be the first thing you grab as you packed up to move out, but how could you forget it? Did he kill someone in my apartment? Is that why I got it for so cheap? Before returning to the apartment, I stopped at the leasing office to ask questions about the previous tenant. When I walked in, the leasing agent seemed peeved to see me. "You talked to the police?" she asked as I walked in. Yeah, I found something disturbing underneath one of the bathroom tiles, and I had to report it. It was literally the journal of all these people that somebody had killed. I wish you would have brought this to me first. Cops sniffing around isn't good for business, and it freaks out other tenants. Yeah, I'm sorry about that, but I thought I was doing the right thing. Can I ask you some questions about the apartment and the previous tenant? This whole thing is kind of freaking me out. The leasing agent shrugged, but I went on to ask questions about it. She explained that he was evicted because his neighbors kept making noise complaints, and some complained about a smell emanating from his apartment. According to her, the guy waited until the very last minute to move out, so they had to throw out a ton of stuff before listing it to be rented. I asked for his name, but she said that she couldn't disclose that to me. She already told the police. Well, how long has it been since he left? About 2 months, she said. Although I was satisfied with the information that she gave me, I was still unnerved by the whole thing. I continued unpacking my apartment over the next couple days. I wanted it to feel like home, but I couldn't stop my mind from running horrible scenarios that could have happened there from the previous tenant. It's hard to unwind when you can't stop wondering if a murder took place where you're sitting. It wasn't even a simple murder that could have taken place either. It would have been horrific, where the killer took their time and inflicted as much pain and terror as possible. Sitting there on my couch, I thought there very well could have been more than just one of these kind of slangs. I couldn't sleep after that, so I decided to spend the night at a hotel. I realized I couldn't stay at a hotel every night because I was locked into a year-long lease. I had to try to make the best of it. My sister is into this new age spirituality stuff, so she suggested that I try to cleanse the place. She gave me what she used to cleanse her space. I don't know if it worked, but it did help me feel better, to the point where I could sleep there again. A couple nights later, I was awoken by a shattering noise in the middle of the night. I shot up in bed to look around. I heard heavy boots trudging through my living area. I grabbed my phone and hid in the closet behind some empty boxes. I was breathing as quietly as possible, listening to the intruder walk around my place. I heard him move to the bathroom. The intruder grumbled some before letting out what sounded like a loud growl. Then, I heard the mirror shatter. He started trashing the place. He went back out into the living room, and I could hear him throwing things around. I hunched over in the closet, called 911 and told them that there was an intruder. They instructed me to stay on the phone. There I sat behind an empty box in my closet, trying to be as quiet as a madman thrashed through my apartment. Once the killer was satisfied with the damage he caused in my living room, he moved into my bedroom. I stopped breathing. I could see his silhouette through the closet door. He was holding a kitchen knife and started stabbing my mattress. I put my hand over my mouth. He walked up to my closet and ripped the door open. I tried to shrink in the darkness as much as I could. Somehow, I was able to hide well enough that he slammed the closet door and continued. I heard him trudge back through the window that he broke and crawled out. He was gone by the time the police arrived. I could not stay in the apartment after that. Fortunately, the leasing company took pity on me and released me from my lease so I could at least find a new place without any cost. After the police investigated some, they told me that there was, in fact, a serial killer that they had been tracking for 2 years. The journal was a breakthrough for them, and they were able to use it to rope in the FBI for help. Now the man is on the FBI most wanted list. When they heard that he had broken into my apartment to receive his journal, they couldn't believe my luck. I was this close to becoming the freshest diary entry. When Lisa told me she heard strange noises from underneath the floor of our apartment, it was hard to believe her. It was a very new apartment, and we had spent thousands of dollars in renovation, taking it from the rundown construction that it was before and turning it into something more beautiful that we could all live in. Perhaps it was for this reason that I did not believe her, even though I should have. Unlike Lisa, I did not come from a wealthy background. I lived with my mother in a dirt-poor neighborhood and a project building that houses more people than we care to know. Moving into an estate where we did not share walls with neighbors was a dream for me after college, and I got to share this new apartment and this new life with Lisa. It was like a fairy tale that my childhood eyes would have been proud to see, but Lisa insisted that she heard noises from the floor of our home. Lisa, we live in a bungalow, and there are no houses underneath us. We have a garage and no basement. I resisted her as much as I could, and sometimes we would fight over it, but Lisa never wavered. So I thought to ask around if anyone else had experienced such challenges in their homes when they first moved into their new apartments. Neatly tarred roads, scarcely ever littered, like the ghetto homes I lived in all my life. I would kiss my teeth in annoyance that Lisa was forcing me to think that getting the new apartment was a bad idea. The neighborhood was so exclusive that we hardly ever saw our neighbors. But on the day I saw Randall, I knew I had to ask the question. Randall was a quaint fellow who lived for loud foreign music. So when I saw him shave his lawn with huge shears instead of a mower, it didn't startle me. I chalked it up to a cultural preference. "Hey, Randall, do you sometimes hear noises from the floor of your building?" I asked after I eased myself with the situation. Randall seemed puzzled and went over the question I asked with his own lips wordlessly for a while before telling me that he had never a reason to suspect that there were noises from underneath the floor of his house. He chuckled and said the music he played was always so loud anyway. In my head, it was settled, and Lisa was only making a fuss over the new apartment. I told him that it was just Lisa's worry, and he laughed some more. "Women," he snickered. Randall and I bantered about sports and life. He told me that, just like me, he claimed that the life he had now was an upgrade for what he used to have. South Africa was a strange place for him, even though he was in South Africa all his life. Moving to America was an easy choice. Randall and I concluded that America had its perks, and we must concern ourselves with enjoying it. Then I left him and thought nothing of the incident, until that strange night came. It had to be past 1 a.m., or sometime so far into dusk, when I heard Lisa scream from somewhere in the house, a shriek so loud that my heart snapped and I jerked up from the bed. I still struggled with sleep, but Lisa's desperate cry echoing around the house made my head spin. I rushed from the room in only my briefs and straight after the noise into the kitchen, where I was met with the shock of my life. The first emotion that washed over me was utter confusion. "Randall!" I barked, shook to my bones by the sight of our neighbor in our kitchen. A neighbor in one's kitchen is not wholly a bad-sounding idea, but the circumstances around it made me numb. Randall had a knife as sharp as night was black. The steel reflected light into my eyes. He had Lisa in his hands, and I was terrified to my bones what he would do to her. "David, help me!" Lisa cried in horror, and I noticed a gash on the side of her face. The blood on the wound had clotted and did not bleed as heavily to be fatal. Randall looked at me with a menacing glare in his eyes. "When I was much younger, I would do your wife right here while you watching, slit her throat and walk out that door," Randall said, in the most horrifying string of words to hit my ears. The most I would get was a fine from the judge. My spinning head spun faster. I didn't understand. The wind blowing into the kitchen blew even colder, and the hair on my skin stood up. I looked around the kitchen, and my eyes fell upon the huge hole on the floor that Randall must have crawled out of. My heart sank from my chest to my stomach. Perhaps he knew I had seen it and laughed at my realization. To impress it in, he put his knife on Lisa's arm and slashed it. Lisa fell to the floor in tears. Did 5 years in prison and can't get a job. For what? Killing? I loved it, but it ruined my life. I will get my lick back, he said, and my heart pounded in my chest like 1,000 drums going off all at the same time. He grabbed her hair, and I stopped thinking. The terror in her cry when he placed his knife on her throat. I had no doubt in my heart that this psychopath was in frenzy and would kill her. I was so afraid that my whole body was shaking, and I knew that I just could not simply watch him kill Lisa. Adrenaline pumped through my veins, propelled me forward, and I jumped him. He turned his knife mid-swing to stab me. The knife ate into my forearm, but I wasn't thinking. I wrestled the handle with him forcefully and pulled the blade out of his hand, then turned on him and stabbed him deep in the chest. Randall held his wound and stumbled backwards, choking on blood as he fell to the floor. Looking around the room, Lisa wasn't there. I called out for her, but she came back with her phone in her hand. "The police will be here any minute," she said, rushing into my arms. The cops did not take their time and came as soon as they could, and the emergency services came moments later to take us to the hospital for medical care. I apologized to Lisa for not listening to her, and she forgave me. But it was the most horrifying night of my life, one which I knew I could not afford a repeat of.
Angela and I became friends in kindergarten on the playground. Every recess, we would sprint to the swings to claim them before anyone else. Swinging back and forth, she became my best friend. Even as a small child, I cherished our friendship. She glowed with joy and would infect other people with her light-hearted spirit. I felt lucky someone so kind wanted to be my friend. All that changed when we were 16 and her mom took her own life. It's like this darkness took root in her after she found her mom dead in the bathtub. Losing a parent would be hard for anyone, let alone how she lost her mom. So I tried to be there for her. I tried to be patient, knowing that grief is a complicated process. I never imagined it would turn my once glowing friend into a monster. I remember watching Angela at the funeral. Her once bright blue eyes now look like an empty, dull gray. She sat slumped over in the pew, staring at her feet the whole time. Her dad patted her back to comfort her, but she never cried. It felt like she was somewhere else. She checked out entirely. When I tried to talk to her afterward, she walked past me like she never knew me. She withdrew from me completely. Her sister would let me know how she was doing from time to time because she knew I cared. Her family was concerned she was pushing me away along with her other friends. Honestly, I thought I just needed to be patient, and she would return to me in time. As weeks passed, Angela's actions grew more and more concerning. She seemed to be taking her mom's death harder than everyone else, which is fair since she's the one who found her. Can you imagine a more terrible thing? Everyone was worried about her. She started to disappear for hours, only to reappear like she never left. Angela tried hard to fake it and hide her grief, but you could see the pain in her eyes. Her family grew more uneasy as she started to develop a fascination with the occult. It started with her getting into New Age spiritualism, but quickly morphed into something more sinister. None of us anticipated how sinister this new hobby of hers would become. Her sister said Angela covered the walls in her room with weird markings, and she would hear her chanting in another language late at night. Around this time, I started having nightmares every night. I would be walking in a room shrouded in fog. I would turn around and see nothing but darkness and fog. Sometimes figures in the fog would approach me. The disturbing part of these dreams is that everyone ended with Angela rushing out of the fog to grab me. I would wake up haunted by her face, creepy grin, and empty eyes. The dreams went on for weeks. My birthday approached, and to my surprise, Angela reached out to me about doing something together. I was ecstatic. I thought my patience paid off and I would have my friend back. The dreams made me a little uneasy, but they were just dreams. Maybe I had them because I missed her. I texted her sister because I thought her reaching out to me was proof that she was healing. Her sister was surprised she reached out to me, but agreed that this was a step in the right direction. Angela told me she had the whole night planned. She wanted to go to this new Mexican restaurant she heard good things about. She knows Mexican is my favorite. Angela asked if I wanted to invite anyone else, but I told her I was happy with just her. I didn't want to overwhelm her after she isolated herself from everyone. The day came and the night felt heavy under the blood-red moon. I remember thinking, how fun, it's a full moon. I went to the address Angela gave me and it led me to an abandoned warehouse. The place had one lamppost that illuminated the barren area. It was in the middle of nowhere. I stood by the lamppost looking around for Angela. The longer I stood there, the more it felt like the darkness became thicker around the circle of light. All I could hear was the rusted doors of the warehouse swaying in the wind. Out of the darkness, I heard footsteps on the gravel road. "Angela?" I called out, my voice echoing into the dark. There was no response, just the sound of the old metal doors. I pulled out my phone to text Angela. She must have sent me the wrong address or something. Just as I was about to dial her number, a chill ran down my spine. I could tell something was off, but I wanted to trust Angela. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a figure in the shadows. My pulse quickened as I strained to make out any details of the figure. "Angela? Is that you?" I called out again, my voice trembling. Again, no response. I hesitated between running back to my car and trying to figure out what was going on. I summoned all my courage to take a step into the darkness. The figure remained still. "Angela, this isn't funny," I said. And then, just as suddenly as it had happened, the figure melted back into the darkness, leaving me alone at the abandoned warehouse. My heart pounded as I stood there, trying to understand what had just happened. Was Angela playing some kind of prank? I glanced around, half expecting the figure to reappear at any moment. Maybe Angela would come running up behind me to scare me. But I remained alone, deserted. With a shaky sigh, I pulled out my phone again to call Angela. It rang once, twice, before going to voicemail. "Angela, where are you?" I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "Something weird just happened. Call me back, okay?" I hung up, my mind racing with 1,000 questions. What if something happened to Angela? What if she was in trouble and I was just standing here doing nothing? I looked at my phone again and called Angela's sister. "Carol?" her sister said into the phone. Hi. Sorry to bother you. Did Angela mention to you what she had planned for tonight? She gave me an address to an abandoned warehouse. I just have a bad feeling." Her sister was silent for a moment. "Can you text me the address?" "Of course," I responded. "Can you let me know if you find Angela? We haven't seen or heard from her all day." "Yeah, I can do that." Her sister ended the call. As I looked up from my phone, I saw a silhouette by the old metal doors waving me down. Relief washed over me as I sprinted towards her, calling out her name. "Angela! Thank God, I was so worried." I gasped for breath. Right as I was about to reach her, she disappeared into the warehouse. Something told me not to follow her, but I had to see what was going on. It was dead silent as I walked into the warehouse. I tried to listen for breathing, but there was nothing. Just as I was fully in the warehouse, something hit me on the back of the head. Everything went black. I awoke on the floor with hands and feet bound. My eyes slowly pieced together the scene. Angela was beside me, hunched over with her back to me. "Angela, what's going on?" I asked. I looked around to see markings on the floor. It made no sense to me at all. I was in the middle of it. I pulled on my restraints, but Angela apparently knew how to tie a knot. She turned her head to look at me. She didn't say anything. She just sat there with a strange smile playing at the corner of her lips. It was a smile that sent shivers down my spine, a smile that held no warmth or sincerity. "Angela, please," I said. You're scaring me." But she just kept smiling, her eyes glinting with an unsettling light. She stood up and started chanting something in a different language as she walked around, lighting candles scattered around me. With the light from the candles, I could see more. She had a knife and a composition notebook with inconsistent scribbles all over the pages. I could only make out a few words: Mom, sacrifice, blood moon. My stomach churned. Did she plan on sacrificing me? "What are you doing?" I whispered, but she didn't respond. She was entranced with her chant. She sat at my feet meditating, still chanting. At that moment, I realized that I lost the friend I had once cherished. Tears crowded my eyes. "This won't bring her back," I tried to tell her. "This won't work. Please, Angela, untie me." I pulled at my restraints, but that only tightened them around my wrists and ankles. Angela continued her chant. She opened her cold, empty eyes and turned her attention towards the knife. She picked up the knife and lifted my shirt to expose my belly. I began to struggle more against my confinement. She started to carve a star onto my stomach, still chanting. I screamed as the knife cut into me. My blood oozed out of her markings. As she was about to make markings on me, I heard the metal doors creak open. "Angela?" It was Angela's father. Hearing his voice, she snapped out of her chant. Her eyes shifted between my stomach and her dad's voice. Her dad rounded the corner and saw Angela beside me, laid out. He started to cry. "Angela, baby, oh, what are you doing?" He was exasperated. "Put the knife down, sweetie. Let's talk about this." "It's the only way," Angela screamed. "Then there is no way," her dad said as he slowly approached her. Once he was close enough, he grabbed her hand with the knife and took it from her. Angela began to sob. "But it's the only way. It'll work. I know it will." Her dad shook his head and pulled her into a hug. He looked at me and nodded before walking off with Angela. It wasn't long until her dad came back to cut me free. He apologized profusely and explained that he and Angela's sister were taking her to a mental hospital for care. They didn't know she was this far gone. After things calmed down, I asked her sister why Angela chose me, or if she knew anything. Her sister told me she looked through Angela's notebook with erratic scribbles, and it seemed like she had to sacrifice someone important to get her mom back. Her sister theorized that I was the next most important person to Angela after their family. Angela couldn't lose any more family, so I was the one she had to sacrifice. I had figured that the grass that looks green isn't so green when you're on the turf. You start to notice the parts of it that the pests had eaten into, the parts of it that had browned and decayed, turned to mush that other greenery can grow off of. It was the same for me with America. For many years, America was the country of my dreams. Life in my home country had become tiring, and in many ways, I felt as though I had outgrown the things that I did there. Moving to the U.S. was not a hard decision. I had the means in my home country to move, and my brother had settled into a local community where I could join him. He had lived in the U.S. long enough to join the local police department, so I assumed I would have no problems with the law. The America I had in my mind and the America I arrived at left me jarred. I was always a worker in my home country. Ever since I got my degree, I had scaled up the corporate ladder a decent amount. So I was puzzled when I found out I could not work in America with all of the knowledge and expertise I had. I lived for 2 weeks in my brother's house, and even though he never complained, It started to feel like torture watching the days roll by with nothing to do. He told me to be patient, and I was. For an extra week, I bid my time, and by the time my first month was going by without any means of employment, I knew I had to do something. I went on the internet, and my search led me to Craigslist. In my home country, I had never had to actively search for job positions. I had a good network of friends and family that could vouch for my tenacity and hard work. But here, I had to search. It was a challenging ordeal, but I knew to see it through. I saw jobs around my area in plumbing and other handiwork, but I did not know how to do those things because I simply was unequipped for anything that did not require a high-level set of specific skills. The closest I saw to what I could consider a job was a professor's ad for a research assistant. When my brother returned from his shift, I told him about the job I had found. I noticed a small amount of hesitation pass before he replied to me with a bob of his head. He asked me about the job, and I gave him the details of it that I had gotten from the professor himself during a call earlier in the day. He asked for the address and asked me to take one of his corporate shirts, as it would help with the perception my employer would get of me. The next day, I was ready for my job interview before the crack of dawn. I traveled as I had been directed through the city to the address I was given. When I arrived at the address, I was taken aback by what appeared to be a house in a very quiet street. So quiet that the buzz of flies shook the tranquility. The house in particular was a modest bungalow with a few steps that one could climb up into the porch. The lawn in front of the house was overgrown and the shrubs had tangled into weeds. I got an awry feeling from this shifty-looking abode, but I needed the job. I approached the building quietly and climbed up the rickety stairs. One of the steps almost crashed under the pressure of my weight, and I noticed it. I knocked on the door once, and it yawned open. I was careful to not poke my head inside because I did not know what to expect. My stomach was a knotted mess that hurt from all the anxiety I was processing. "Hello, Professor Emile?" I called into the house, and a deep voice bellowed back with an answer. "Enter, Daniel. I've been expecting you," the answer was, and I stepped in. The smell of a strange incense being burned in the room wafted into my nostrils, and I struggled to contain it in the face of my new employer. When he saw that I was in the house, he turned around in his chair from facing the table to facing me. "Just as I expected from that voice. A foreigner," he said, as though he expected only foreigners to apply to his ad on Craigslist that required a research assistant of all jobs. "Could you come with me to fetch some of the documents from the basement? We will have to go through them together." I was taken aback immediately by this request because even though I felt myself drifting towards fulfilling this task, I didn't expect that I would get the job so easily as I had only come for a physical interview. I did not mention my observation as I walked with Professor Emile down a stairway into the basement, which was lit by a clumsy-looking lamp. My instinct went off about the basement not being exactly right, but I was not American, so I could not tell why homes were designed like horror passages. I observed the smell from the living room had changed and something more pungent had begun to replace the odor in my nostrils. But I didn't think too much about it. Professor Emile pushed the door open, and I followed him into a dim-lit room. He walked to the corner as though to turn on the light in the basement. I stood facing him, not expecting that he would swing a heavy baseball bat at my face, knocking me over with a wild swing. "Bastard," I heard him cuss in vicious aggression. "I'm gonna enjoy devouring your flesh. It's been months of waiting for a taste of one of you." I could not understand how I had walked into the hands of a deranged cannibal who stalked people online with false ads of a job offering. Blood oozed out of my face as I lay on the floor in utter petrification. But even in my dizziness, I understood my situation and the nightmare that it was. I had not wished for death. My life in my home country had been good. I wanted better. I had applied because I wanted a job, and now the hands of death were closing around my neck like a vicious grip. I tried to protest my horror, but I found myself too stunned to speak from the floor. I was conscious. It was all I knew. Even my limbs would not move. I thought about my mother, and my face was hot with tears. I thought about my brother, too, as I started to drift into oblivion. Professor Emile walked to me with the bat in his hand and took one more swing on my knee. I heard my bone crack, and what followed was a loud bang of a gunshot. I thought I had been shot, but it was Professor Emile who fell forward and unto me in a heap. "Daniel, are you okay?" My brother swooped in, and I passed out from the tumultuous emotions that were coursing through me. I would later awake in the hospital and be told that Professor Emile had died from a shot to the head, and my life had been spared by my brother's quick thinking to trail me with a tracker he put in the cloth he offered me. Professor Emile's house was littered with victims of the deadly traps he set online.
The house was the last one on the street. Advertised at the local estate agents as a well-loved property in need of some general maintenance, it had immediately piqued my interest. The area wasn't well known to me, but it seemed quiet and away from the main thoroughfare into town. The kind of place that troublemakers wouldn't bother, which is what I was in need of as a single mother. The price was just within my budget too, and it only took one viewing for me to decide to take it. My son seemed to like it too, which was a bonus. The first week was a blur of packing and unpacking, replacing the dingy yellow walls of our old apartment with the floral pink wallpaper of the new house. It was clear nobody had lived there in a while, since the place was rife with dust and mildew, like the windows hadn't been opened in over a year, leaving everything to settle in the crevices. Some pieces of furniture had been left behind, a couple of chairs, an old dining table, and a moth-eaten sofa that went straight into a skip. Upstairs, the wooden bed frames had been abandoned, along with a scuffed dresser and wardrobe, but everything else was missing. The hard floors didn't even have a rug, and several dark stains tarnished the wood in places. About a week after moving into the new house, it started to resemble something more of a home. I managed to grab some furniture from local yard sales and thrift shops, and the empty, desolate rooms were soon populated by pops of color. I even let my son Henry choose out some things for his room, since we were no longer confined by the limited space of our old apartment. Everything went smoothly that first week. Henry and I gradually settled into the routine of our new surroundings, and I started to feel like we finally had a place we felt safe. Somewhere we could stay for a while, growing into our environment. I never had a place to call home, and I thought that this might be it. But I was wrong. It was the second Tuesday we'd spent living in that house. Henry was at school, and I was doing some cleaning, trying to scrub out the old stains in the kitchen. After spending an hour inhaling bleach and scraping the sink clean, I headed upstairs for a short break. There was some laundry to put away, so I was between rooms when I heard it. Some sort of soft hissing sound coming from above me. At first, I paused, laundry basket hoisted in my arm, listening carefully. I thought maybe it was the wind or something else from outside, but it was coming from directly above me. I lifted my gaze to the small hatch in the ceiling. The attic had been detailed in the plans of the house, but I had yet to go up there. I had figured it wasn't much of a priority when I had the rest of the house to sort out first, so I hadn't bothered to investigate. Was that where the sounds were coming from? I set the laundry basket down and stretched up onto my tiptoes, trying to get a better idea of what I was hearing, but it was too faint to get a proper grasp on it. If there was something up there that I needed to know about, there was no point in delaying any longer. I didn't have any means of getting up there without a ladder, which I didn't currently possess, so I hurried around to my neighbors to see if I could borrow one. Armed with a rusty stepladder, I set it up below the hatch and began to climb, listening to that strange undulating hiss noise coming from above. I undid the latch and pushed open the attic door, immediately choking on the dust that was billowing down. Once the air had cleared, I poked my head through the gap, brushing aside a stray cobweb. The attic wasn't thrown into pitch darkness as I expected. A faint grainy light swept across the floorboards, illuminating the dust in the air. The gray light was coming from somewhere further in. Swallowing back my apprehension, I hoisted myself up through the hatch and scrambled onto the floor of the attic, finally picking myself up. I dug my phone out of my pocket and switched on the torch function, shining it across my feet. A couple of insects skittered and dispersed into the corners of the room, but I ignored them. Bugs were one thing I wasn't scared of, thanks to growing up with several older brothers. The attic was empty for the most part, except for a couple of old cardboard boxes and black trash bags. What drew my attention, however, was the thing at the very back of the attic. The thing that was emitting that faint, grainy light. It was a television. An old boxy thing with a VCR slot, like something from the 90s. The screen was filled with fuzzy gray static, the reason for the light and the hissing sound I'd heard from before. I walked closer to the TV, frowning. Why was it turned on? I shone my torch over the walls, but I couldn't see a power plug anywhere. How was it managing to power itself without electricity? The cord slithered loosely across the floorboard, disconnected. Surely it was impossible for a TV like this to work without power. It was all rather bizarre, but there was no point dwelling on something you couldn't explain. I reached for the power button and turned it off. The attic went deathly silent, my torchlight dimming. A faint chill ran over my arms and neck, bringing goosebumps to the surface. Not sure where the feeling was coming from, I did my best to swallow back the dread and crossed the attic back to the ladder. I had barely put my foot on the first rung when the TV switched itself back on. The sudden burst of static made me jump, eliciting a soft yell from my lips. I threw back my head and glanced toward the television on the other side of the room. Static once more filled the screen, wavy gray lines that made my eyes water the more I looked at it. I stood, frozen, one foot on the ladder, staring into the gloom at the TV. Did it have some kind of faulty wiring? Did that even make sense? What other explanation was there? Because I certainly didn't believe in anything of a paranormal nature. Technology could be unpredictable, even the old stuff. There had to be some kind of reason that I was simply unaware of. Ignoring the slight tremor in my hand, I crossed the attic once more and jabbed the off button, plunging the screen into darkness. I waited a second, then another. When I was certain it wouldn't turn back on, I turned around. This time, what I heard from the television wasn't static. It was a voice, a whisper, soft as the wind. The chill from before returned, making me feel cold all over. A flutter of unease made my heart beat faster. Could I have imagined it? I wanted to say yes, but when I turned back around, the TV was on again. The whisper had gone, replaced once more by static, but I couldn't get the sound of it out of my head. I stared at the undulating gray sea on the screen until my eyes began to glimpse something through the chaos. A shape hidden beneath the reams of pixels. It took me a second to realize what I was seeing. A face, or something that resembled a face. I glimpsed two dark eyes, a long jaw, sunken cheeks. I blinked, wishing for the image to disappear, but it was still there, a face amongst the static. With a sharp gasp, I hit the switch again, banishing the face from my view. Instead, my own distorted, terrified gaze stared back through the reflection on the screen. Whatever was wrong with this TV, it wasn't normal. I didn't have an explanation, but it wasn't simply some electrical fault. It was something else. In the end, I decided to just throw the TV out. I didn't know if it could be fixed or if it was worth anything, but I knew that I had to get rid of it. Whatever had happened in this house, with this television, I had no part of it, nor would I involve myself or my son any further.